Hey guys, what's up? It's River, and today we're looking at the Nikon D3500. In my opinion, this is the best, and I mean the best DSLR starter kit on the market right now, simply because of what this camera offers and the price point that it comes at. So let's do an in-depth review of exactly what this camera does, exactly who this camera's for, and should you buy one at this very affordable price in 2019. Let's check it out. Also, just to let you guys know, there's a link in the description below for the absolute best pricing on this camera. So if you're interested, be sure to check that out. So let's jump into the specs of this very, very affordable camera. It has a 24.2 megapixel APS-C sensor. And now that sensor is impressive because Canon's competitor camera, which is the T7, has a 24.2 megapixel sensor, but that camera is $700. So for half the price, you get this pretty much a comparable sensor. That's really impressive. And again, like I said earlier, the price point of this camera is really what makes this camera great. And as for the ISO, it goes from 100 to 25,600. Now, before you get too excited, it's actually not that great of an ISO because 25,600 on this camera looks like trash. It's super noisy, it is simply unusable. This camera is really only good up to 3200 or 6400. 6400 is usable with a little bit of noise reduction, but this camera, I would really say 3200 is a sweet spot. But considering the price again, that's a really good deal. Next, it does 5 frames per second in photo mode. Now that's nothing to write home about, but that is a pretty adequate photo speed for like birthday parties, vacation, you know, maybe trying to get your dog. Like you're not gonna be able to do sports photography or anything super serious with this, but that is a very, very respectable shooting speed. So kudos to this camera. However, one thing that I just quickly want to point out is that after those 5 frames per second, it's gonna need about roughly 18 to 20 seconds based on my testing of buffer time to kind of, until it's ready to shoot again. So again, this is not something you want to use for moments where it's like, it's happened once and it's gone. This is a camera where you want to use the 5 frames per second very sparingly, like, oh, I need to get that and it's fast moving. But other than that, this is really a single slow camera. Next, let's talk about video in this camera. It does 1080 at 23, 30, and 60 frames per second, so you can get a bit of slow motion out of this camera. However, the video in this camera is really nothing to write home about. It's not bad in any way, but it's just very vanilla video. It doesn't have like a superb autofocus system like the Sony cameras do for video. It doesn't have like superb slow motion. It doesn't have any color profiles. It doesn't really have anything particularly special about the video. It's kind of just there to appease the customer. So if you're just someone that's like mostly taking photos and every now and then you're like, yeah, I'll take a little video clip, this camera's great. But if you're someone that wants to make like really cinematic work, or if you want to predominantly use this for video, this is not the camera for you. But considering the very, very, very affordable price point, yes, I'm coming back to that price point again, the very affordable price point, I really can't complain. It's a very affordable camera and the video is exactly what you would expect at that price point. Next, let's talk about autofocus in this camera. This camera has 11 points of autofocus, which is very respectable considering this price point. And also, its direct competitor, the Canon T7, only has 9. And now those 2 points of autofocus are not going to change anyone's life, but it's just nice to know you're getting a good deal. And as for the actual autofocus in this camera, it's very, very good. Nikon is predominantly a photo company, and so because of that, they have a very, very good autofocusing system. I would actually say they have the second best autofocusing system in the industry right after Sony. I would definitely say Nikon has a better autofocusing system than Canon, direct competitor. So having an autofocus system that's very, very reliable in a camera like this is great because this camera is really made for people that are like amateurs, very new to cameras, just kind of learning the ropes, starting out, and to have a very reliable camera with a very reliable autofocus system is perfect for them because when you're new to cameras, you don't really understand focusing, you don't really want to futz around with that stuff, you don't really get aperture and all that, so you just get a camera that has a really good autofocusing system and you just roll with it and you don't miss your shots. Also, quick side note, the autofocusing for video is different than the autofocusing for photo. The autofocusing for video is not great, it is just not that usable. It is like, meh. So really, if you're gonna be shooting in video, do not rely on the autofocusing. I really recommend using this camera and manually focusing it for video. But again, if you're someone that's just starting out, that's probably gonna be really tough. So that is something to consider when getting this camera. And speaking of the fact that this camera is for beginners and newbies and people that are just learning photos in general, this camera comes with a guide mode, and I love this guide mode. I actually bought one of these cameras for my dad, and my dad is a scientist and has no idea how to work a camera. But thanks to that guide mode, I kind of like to call it a kids mode. It is so easy to figure out how to use this camera. So if you're someone that's buying it for their mom or their parents like I did, or buying it for a partner, or just like even for yourself, and you're like, I really don't want to have to deal with the struggles of learning a camera, this camera makes it super easy, uses language that is really easy to understand. It doesn't talk about aperture and bokeh. It just asks you, would you like a fuzzy background? If so, choose this setting. Would you like a blurry background, or would you like a sharp background? Use this. If you want your image to be brighter, use this. Like, it makes it super easy to use. That guide mode, I wish I had something like this when I picked up a camera in 2008, which is, it was over 10 years ago. But yeah, this guide mode is super helpful, and considering the fact that this is made for newbies and people that are just starting, this is perfect for them. Next, let's talk about the lens on this camera. This camera comes with an 18 to 55 millimeter interchangeable lens, which means you can take it off. And you have the opportunity to grow your lens collection, get cooler lenses, more fun lenses, lenses that let you shoot further. Overall, it's just nice to have this price point with an interchangeable lens system. Usually at this price point, you can only really get a compact, which has a fixed lens on it. And as for the actual lens, it's a very, very good lens. I'm actually really surprised by the quality of this lens, considering it's $100. Now, it's not like the greatest lens ever, but for $100, this totally beats the Canon lens that you get with Canon cameras, which is an 18 to 55 as well, and that's just like a completely trash lens. It's plastic, it breaks. I don't ever recommend anybody buy that lens. But this lens, really impressed by the quality. It has a locking system on it. It has a nice grippy feel to it. The focus wheel is nice and fluid and actually really feels good to change manual focus. So if you do plan to use this camera for focusing in video, this is actually a fun focus system. And just overall, this is a really good lens. I really like using it, and I'm surprised how cheap this lens is. Next, let's talk about low light in this camera. The camera itself is good up to 6400 ISO with noise reduction, and 3200 just totally fine, clean, good to go. However, the lens really isn't made for low light. The lens is 3.5 at its fastest and a 5.6 at its slowest. Now, if you're not a techie and you don't know what that means, it just kind of says the lens isn't good for low light because it does not let in a lot of light. What you want is a lens with a faster aperture. What I always recommend for low light photography is the Sigma 18 to 35. It's a great lens. It's 1.8 constant at any end of the lens, and it's just an overall beautiful, super sharp lens. However, it's a $700 lens, and I can't imagine a lot of people buying a $700 lens for a $300 camera. So, yeah. But chances are, if you are a beginner and someone that's just picking up a camera for fun, you probably aren't going to be trying to do low light photography because it is very challenging to do. So what you could use on this camera is the flash. This flash is plenty bright if you're shooting people up close, like a little corner of the street, objects on your travels. This flash should be plenty bright and you don't have to worry about there not being light outs. This flash is a must-have because, surprisingly enough, not a lot of cameras have flashes these days. So overall, I'm really impressed with this package. The sensor, the lens, the autofocusing system, the photo speed, the video. This is a really good camera for $446. I'm really impressed with it. And normally $446 will barely get you a decent compact. And the fact that I can get a DSLR for that much is really impressive and really awesome for photo shooters everywhere. Next, let's talk about the build quality of this camera. And this camera is only $350 body alone and $446 with the lens, and I'm really surprised by how well built this camera is. It does not feel like that cheap of a camera. Now, $450 is nothing to sneeze at, but this is a really, really well built camera. Everything from the SD card slot to the way the buttons are laid out, how clicky everything is, it just feels really, really well built, and it feels super solid. Like, I do not feel like I'm using a cheap camera. Something like the Ryko GR3 is a $900 camera, and that thing feels like it's gonna fall apart in my hands. Although that camera is a bit of a different story, but this is a $450 camera, lens included, and damn, like, this camera is solidly built. This lens has this really nice texture on it. It's grippy. It's got a nice focus feel to it. If you are thinking about giving this to someone as a present, they will not feel like you bought them a cheap gift. This is a very, very well built camera, super solid. There just really isn't that much more to say about it other than the fact this is a really high quality camera. this camera will last you for years to come. Overall, this camera is really well built. Everything on this camera feels really premium and it's really, really fun to use. But one of my favorite features about this camera is the shutter sound. That shutter is super satisfying, just makes the camera that much more fun to use. So if you are a geek like me and you care about the shutter sound, this camera has a very satisfying shutter sound. On top of the build quality, another thing that I really appreciate about this camera is the way the buttons are laid out. Now, if you look on the back here, there's a button right there for drive mode, as in how fast you want this camera shooting. So buttons there for zoom, there's a button there for menu, information, playback, autofocus. There's one there to literally switch between seeing your image on the back of the screen or through the viewfinder. Like, this really has all the right shortcuts in all the right places. And I'm surprised to get such a robust body with so many features and shortcut buttons on a camera like this. If I bought a Canon T7, I would not get the same amount of buttons and like shortcuts on a camera like this. Like, it even has a features dial that lets you switch between all your best modes and stuff. And that's just not a feature that you would normally see on such an affordable camera. If I got a compact camera for about the same price, it would not have all this good stuff on the back. And that's one thing that makes this camera really unique. It really feels like a $700 or $800 camera, but it's only $450. This is a really, really good bargain. Although something to note, this camera does not have a flip screen or a touch screen. That is more of a premium feature that you would get on a higher end DSLR, and at this price point, I'd be really surprised if we got a touch or a flip screen. And another thing that I have to add, this camera is extremely light. Normally DSLRs are kind of a pain or a hassle to take around with you, but this camera honestly feels about as easy to take around with me as a compact camera, so I really appreciate the lightweight of this camera. And while we're on the topic of body, let's quickly talk about the battery. The battery in this camera, it's not as good as Canon batteries, and that's like the one place that this camera is not better than its Canon counterpart. It's not quite as long lasting, but it is a very, very good battery. I found that on my shooting days, it lasted me about 4 to 6 hours for video, and for my shooting days, I pretty much felt like it lasted me all day. I really didn't feel like I needed to change batteries when I was taking photos with this camera for 2 to 3 days. So overall, really good battery, but I would recommend buying a second or third one. They're really cheap on Amazon, and it's just nice to have a second or third battery, because a camera like this, you're taking on vacation, you're shooting family functions, you really don't want to run out of battery. So battery, I would say 8 out of 10, but a second battery would be nice. So ultimately, who is this camera for and who does it make sense for in 2019? And ultimately, there's two types of people that should buy this camera. One, the enthusiast or hobbyist, someone that likes photography, you want to do better than your cell phone photos, but you just want to take family vacation photos, your maybe birthday party photos, if you're just out with friends, you're not that serious about it, you're not trying to make it into a career, and you just want to do better than your cell phone photos, and this is a great camera. For $350 or $450 with the lens, you get a great package, you'll get beautiful images out of it, and it's super easy to use. This makes a lot of sense for enthusiasts. The second kind of person this camera is for is the beginner, which, like, you just started film school, you just picked up a camera, maybe you want to make it into a career, but you're serious about taking photos, you're serious about making work. And this camera is fantastic. Nikon makes a very, very solid, very high-end cameras, so you're going to get a very, very good image out of these cameras. Nikon is known for being the go-to camera for most professional shooters. However, if you're looking to do video, this is not the camera for you. If you're a beginner video shooter, this is not the camera for you. Canon does video really well, and I really recommend taking a look at something like the Canon 80D or the T7i. But if you're a beginner photo, this camera is fantastic. However, if you are someone that wants to do photos for moving objects like wildlife, race car, sports photography, this camera is simply not fast enough to keep up, and I would look at something a little more high-end. Also, because of the price point of this camera, this is the camera I would use for dangerous shoots. If I'm going to a location where I could probably get robbed for my camera, I could get my camera stolen, lost, maybe my camera would get wet and just break. For $450, you're getting a very, very, very good camera, and I would not feel bad at all having to shoot my trip or my job on this camera. But if it does break or gets rained in on, just gets destroyed, I really wouldn't be that upset. If I had my Canon 5D Mark IV, my Sony a7R II, or like my Red camera, which is like a $6,000 and $10,000 camera, I'd be very upset. But I'm gonna get very, very good photos on this camera, and if at the end of the job this camera just totaled, destroyed, lost, I'm not gonna be that sad about it. So my final verdict on this camera, I would pick it up if I'm a photo enthusiast or someone that's just beginning. This is a very, very good camera for a very, very low price, and it makes it hard to justify a Canon or a Sony camera over a very affordable and a very good DSLR like this one. This is, again, as I said, I think the best starter package on the market right now for DSLRs. Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the video. As always, there's a link in the description below for the best pricing on this camera, so be sure to check that out. And if you have any questions whatsoever, leave me a comment down below. I'll be sure to get back to every single one of you. Be sure to like and subscribe for future content. Until next time, guys.